Kate Mila Falcha, welcome to Irish Granny Helen. And I have a very interesting story today, kind of a disturbing mystery that's yet to be solved. Before I start, welcome to my new subscribers and deep gratitude to those of you who have stuck around through all the changes. And just to let everybody know that all the things you loved about my channel are continuing on Substack if you become a subscriber behind the paywall. That's all I'll say. Ask your Irish granny, and the easiest thing to do is to use a laptop. I don't like their app on my phone. I have a hard time with it. So I would suggest that you access the website, Substack, and then go to Ask Your Irish Granny. All kinds of fun stuff happening over there. So today I'd like to talk about the very disturbing case of Lindsay Elizabeth Buziak, who was born November 2nd, 1983, to Jeffrey and Evelyn Buziak. She has one sister. She, I believe, is from Calgary, but died at the age of 24 in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. She was a real estate agent who had just begun in her career, kind of a junior member of a larger office. She had a very promising career. She was an ambitious young woman. She was intelligent, popular. She's described as very caring. I knew about this story because I watched Dateline. But I went back and I rewatched Dateline. And I watched Dr. Grande, who is the expert on psychopathology, and he gives his assessment. Very logical mind. I love how he sorts these cases out. There's quite a bit about this actually in podcasts and on YouTube. So if you're curious and you want to actually see the people, you know, the names of the family members and friends and police are kind of amorphous. It makes a difference to be able to actually see them. But I'll get you the basics of this story. And keep in mind that today I'm just going to give you the details. I'll be doing a deeper dive, as I used to do, on my own, on the Behind the Paywall on Substack. And then Deborah Lupian and this will be one of the cases that we will really dive into. So anyway, she was living with her boyfriend, Jason Zalo, who was a mortgage investor or something. Somebody mentioned it once, and it didn't click. Some of the information available kind of leads you to believe that he worked in the same real estate office. Maybe he did, but he wasn't really a real estate agent. He was maybe a mortgage broker. I can't remember. Well, that's neither here nor there. He came from a prominent, wealthy family. He owned his own business also. The family owned I think a Remax. His mother was a big shot in this particular company where Lindsay was a junior agent. So we're going back to 2008. It's been a long time since this happened. In late January of 2008, Lindsay got a phone call from a woman with a pseudo-Spanish Mexican accent who told Lindsay that she was urgently seeking a home. Her husband had got transferred from work and they were moving in 2 days. They needed a home with a budget of $1 million. They wanted 3 bedrooms, 3 baths. They wanted room for a housekeeper. Lindsay was very uncomfortable about this phone call. She told a number of people, the receptionist at work, other agents at work, her boyfriend, And her father, she told them all that this woman sounded like she had a phony accent that she was faking. And the woman did give her a name. It later turned out to be false. Anyway, Buziak was unnerved. She asked this woman, "How did you get my name?" Because the woman called her on Lindsay's private cell phone. And the woman said, "Oh, I got your number from a former client." And it wasn't clear. There's a little bit of, you know, how these cases are. It's like a game of telephone over the decades. It wasn't clear to me if this woman on the other end of the phone specifically said who gave her the phone number, or just alluded to it was a former client of yours. But Lindsay was never able to confirm where that number came from, how this stranger got it. She shared her concerns. She felt really creeped out. She shared it with her boyfriend and her father, and she expressed to her boyfriend that she was reluctant to really pursue this. He encouraged her. He said, "Listen, $1 million house, there's a big commission in that for you, and that'll really kickstart your career." He said, "You know, I'll come with you, or I will show the house for you, and we'll let you get the credit for it." And she said, "Oh no, you know, I'm going to be a big girl." So he said, "I'll tell you what, I'll wait outside in the car, and while you show the property inside, and maybe you'll feel more secure that way." So anyway, she searched for a few days, and finally she found potential properties, and specifically the first one. These people wanted a property that was in move-in condition, that they could just show up with their moving truck and move in immediately. So not with anybody in it and not needing any kind of repairs. She found this new house, and it was on 5:30 p.m. Saturday, February 2nd in 2008. She decided, she made the appointment, she was going to show the house to this woman. That afternoon, she and Zalo, her boyfriend, had a late lunch together. There's a record of the bill. They paid at $4.24. Then they left in separate cars. Now, there's a little bit contradictory storyline here. Some people said she went home first to change her clothes before her appointment. Some said she actually went to the office and talked to the receptionist and told the receptionist she was nervous. He went to drop off a contract. He went to an auto repair shop. Then he was giving a colleague a ride. So this made him a little bit late. He didn't show up exactly at 5:30. There is CCTV, closed circuit television, of him at the shop at 5:30. And he called her and asked her to give him directions to the house. And she was starting to tell him, and then she said, "Oh, the Mexicans are here. I have to go," and cut him off. So they texted for a moment back and forth, and he said, "Okay, I'm going to be late. I've got the directions. I'm on my way." And she never responded. So this house was 1702 D'Souza Place. It was a cul-de-sac. It was a new development, part of a larger development, but this particular one was a tiny cul-de-sac with only 4 houses. The particular house she was going to show was at the end of the cul-de-sac, so that it was at the intersection of D'Souza and then the main road, Torquay Road, which followed the side of the property and the back fence parallel to Torquay Road. So if you can imagine, the house is facing this cul-de-sac, and then on this, like pretend this is the front of the house. On this, oh, everything's backwards on this, forget it. I don't think I'm ever going to be able to figure out why everything is backwards all the time. When I accommodate for it being backwards, it still ends up being backwards. So just imagine in your head, you're standing in the front window of the house looking out at the street. You're looking out at the cul-de-sac that curves to your left, and on your right is the long right side of the house to the backyard. That's Torquay Road. So this woman had told Buziak, "I'll come alone," and she showed up with a man. So at 5:30, 2 witnesses saw this couple arrive, and they arrived on foot from the direction of Torquay Road. They did not drive up, which seemed odd. The woman was blonde. That's all anybody remembered, because she was wearing a dress with such a distinctive black, white, and kind of a hot pink fuchsia swirl on it. There's actually drawings of it. People remembered it so much. It was a great little distraction because they didn't pay a lot of attention to herself. They paid attention to the dress. She was with a man who was about 6 feet tall with dark hair, and the woman they seemed to think was between 35 and 45. Anyway, they walked up to the cul-de-sac. People saw Buziak greet them. They said she put out her hand. They shook hands, and all the witnesses said they definitely got the impression from body language that she didn't know them. This was, definitely a first-time meeting. And then all three entered the house. And hot on the heels of that, just barely missing seeing them go in the house, Jason and the friend got there. They got there about 5:40-ish. And as they pulled up, he thought he saw a figure in the glass of the door. The door had this sort of leaded smoked glass, like they make, and he saw a figure, he thought. So they parked right outside the house for about 10 minutes, and then he got out and went to the door, and the door was locked. He got out and went to the door, and he saw, once again, what he saw as figures, people behind the glass, and he thought, oh God, I don't want them to catch me here. I don't want to seem like the interfering, hovering, nosy boyfriend. I don't want it to be unprofessional for Lindsay. So he and the friend, they quickly, they got into the car, and he just drove out of the driveway and just around the corner and parked along the side fence so that these people wouldn't notice him. And they waited another 10 minutes, and he texted her again, are you okay? Is everything okay? She never replied, and that 20 minutes now they've been waiting, and he got nervous. So they got out of the car. He went to the front door. It was locked, and he could see her shoes at the entry. They had a policy in this real estate agency. They always took off shoes. Everybody who came in to look at a house took off their shoes to be respectful of the next owner, that they wouldn't track mud on the carpets or whatever. So they couldn't get in the front door. Now, there are some a little bit different variations of what happened. He knocked and he knocked and he knocked, and nobody answered. So he called 911. And while he was calling 911, he and his friend tried to find another entry. They went around the fence to the backyard. Some say there was a gap in the back fence and his friend climbed through. Some say Jason boosted the friend over the fence. But suffice it to say that the friend went into the yard while Jason was on the phone telling 911, we are going to get into this house. I'm really worried about her. And the friend, once over the gate, over the fence, saw that the back patio door was wide open. And he went in immediately. He opened the front door, unlocked it. Jason went in, and they immediately started calling and looking, did a quick look around the bottom floor, didn't see her, ran upstairs and found her body in the master bedroom. And she was dead. So let's see here. There was blood on the walls, up all the way up to the ceiling, blood everywhere. She was really battered. And they called 911 back. Paramedics came, police came. Paramedics immediately declared her dead. She had been stabbed. Now, this is interesting. You have to kind of hunt for the details. She'd been stabbed more than 40 times. She had no defensive wounds. They think the first stab was to her back through her spinal column. And her throat was cut. So this is just brutal overkill. And when the police see something like brutal overkill, their sensors go up. Nothing was stolen. Her purse, her money, her keys, her phone, all of that stuff was still there, and she was not otherwise assaulted. Zalo's friend and Zalo were both arrested. They were put in handcuffs and dragged down to the police station because Zalo was covered in blood. He had tried to give her CPR, but you know. So they were held for hours, and they weren't charged. They were released because their stories coordinated. The cops immediately got hold of the CCTV film, and they could see the phones. It was pretty clear that their stories agreed with each other, agreed with other people, and were really consistent with the technological evidence that was at hand immediately. So they knew that these two guys didn't do it. But was he involved? That remains to be seen. Over the years, Zalo's been dragged back by the police and questioned by Saanich police. Now, I thought this happened in Victoria, but I think I heard last night on one of the shows that this is a suburb. So, you know how that goes. Anyway, they said that he's no longer a suspect, that he was always very cooperative, and he passed a polygraph. There's no evidence. There was no fingerprints and essentially no DNA, but then they talked about maybe DNA improvements in technology. They might be able to find DNA. It's a little uncertain. Like I said, it's hard to get a consistent story in any of these true crime cases. And if you're an expert on this case, I'm just telling the story. I'm not trying to solve it, and there may be discrepancies in the details that I've gotten. I've gone through the internet. I've gone through a podcast and several videos on YouTube. So apologies if this is not etched in stone. This is pretty much for the basic story, because it's a mystery, and that's what we're looking at, is unsolved mysteries. So the cops had a number of opinions. They believed that this was really well planned and executed by people who had killed before. Now, the police went through a metamorphosis of what they thought might have happened, and they investigated theories and dismissed the theories. We'll talk about that. The Dateline that I saw, they had experts, national forensic experts. I got the impression that they had an opinion about who might be involved. They were giving each other the side eye constantly. It was really interesting. But they agreed that it was somebody close to her who knew her very well. That's all they would say. And her father says he knows who did it. Can't say, but he says he's still, all these years later, he's still on top of it. It's really sad. So the police think that the killers were planning on leaving through the front door, and Zalo just missed bumping into them face to face. When he got out and tried the handle and he saw the shadow again, that they were getting ready to leave, and panicked when they saw him and fled out the back door. So what they're saying, the consensus is it was very well planned, but it wasn't necessarily 100% professional. There were a few things about it that seemed a little emotional and hasty. But all of the stuff is consistent with what the witnesses saw. They went through and they checked every single car parked there, and they were able to find who was in each car, and they weren't eliminated as suspects. The cell phone call from this strange woman, Buziak, was the cell phone. They were able to trace the number, and it had been bought in Vancouver, British Columbia, several months before the murder. It was a burner phone, and it was never used before that call. It was activated under the name Paulo Rodriguez, a fake name. They gave a registration to a legitimate business in Vancouver, but the business had absolutely no connection to any of this. They just picked a random address. The phone was deactivated after the murder and not used since then. But because some of the shows that I watched about this were older and some were more recent, they have actually gotten some more evidence about that. We'll talk about that in a minute. The cell phone pings traveled on the ferry from Vancouver a day before the murder. So whoever did this came from Vancouver area. And the phone was used for the sole purpose of the murder and discarded afterwards. So they really do believe this was very carefully planned, including the dress the woman wore. They really believe it was a distraction. Now, this De Sousa cul-de-sac was named for the developer, Joe De Sousa, who happened to be a friend and business associate of Zalo's family, of his mom. His mother was a big shot in real estate, and she owned the company that Lindsay worked for, and apparently her son was involved in mortgages with them. So part of the cul-de-sac was still under construction. All the houses, there were 4 houses, and not all were finished. And De Sousa had actually been on the cul-de-sac at that exact location, not in the house, but in that location, an hour before the murder, because he was supervising some of the construction. But the police now say that no member of the Zalo family is suspected. So Dateline, September of 2010, did the Dream House murder. And you can see this on YouTube. If you Google type in the Lindsay Buziak murder on Dateline. It's divided up into sections, but it's the entire show. And they were very kind. You don't even have to fuss with reconnecting to the next part. I think there are 6 parts, and they automatically just go from part to part with almost no interruption. So that was handy. So the police discovered that in December of 2007, so 8 weeks before she was murdered, Buziak tried to contact a friend of her ex-boyfriend while on a visit to Calgary. So here's what happened. I'm putting together now several different sources. She went to Calgary where her father lived, and she had lived there, and she had a former boyfriend with whom she had broken up. She confessed to her father that she still had feelings for this boyfriend and that she was going to break up with Zalo. She had not told him. And she had actually put on a really good show. She went skiing with Zalo's family and tried very hard to kind of mend the relationship or make the best of the relationship. But she told her father that she was heartbroken that she had broken up with this earlier boyfriend and had tried to contact him while she was in Calgary. Interestingly enough, she made this connection with somebody. I'm not clear if it was the friend of the old boyfriend or if it was actually the old boyfriend, but suffice it to say, she was in Calgary and people knew it and somebody talked to her. And on January 22nd of 2008, so 2 weeks before she died, there was the largest drug bust in Alberta history. And the friend she spoke with, so I don't think it was the boyfriend because he's not in jail. The friend she spoke with was arrested and was accused of being a major participant in a drug trafficking operation. So for a long time, the police looked into was Buziak's murder ordered by a cartel because they thought she was a police informant. No police department says she was an informant. They all say, no, she was not an informant. She had no connection at all to this drug bust. But did somebody maybe in error think she did? So the cops eliminated it as a motive. She was not a confidential informant. They also felt like this murder seemed too personal. It didn't seem like she was murdered by a professional hit man. Yolanda McClary, who's a crime scene investigator, and she's been on crime shows on television, and Dwayne Stanton, a well-known homicide detective. They're the national experts, two of the national experts who researched this, and they say that they don't think this was contracted in relation to a drug bust or a drug cartel, but it was brutal, but it was too amateurish. They believe it was personal, planned by someone close to her with inside information about her real estate office where she worked. Well, that narrows things. Another drug bust was also considered because her ex-boyfriend was involved, and in 2003, this is 5 years earlier, she and he had their phones tapped by the police. They didn't know this, but it was dismissed because it was quite apparent she was not involved in anything. She was considered like squeaky clean by all her friends. She didn't do any drugs. She was real healthy and just was one of these absolutely desirous of putting forward her career. Ambitious, yes, but not cutthroat. Just really loved her job and really wanted to do well in it. And it was her major, major focus. And she was not going to let anything get in the way. Her best friend said she worked so hard to get her real estate license that she would do nothing to negatively affect it. And their names were never, she and her old boyfriend, their names were never on any witness list. They were never called into court. They were surveilled because of connections that they had. But it was just like their friends were up to no good, but they weren't involved. So later in 2008, a close friend by the name of Nikki was woken up in the middle of the night by an unknown phone call. And the caller had a strange foreign accent, and it freaked her out because she remembered what happened with Buziak and the phone call and the odd accent that sounded fake. She felt the same way about this. So she decided she was going to find out who this was that called her, and she called the number back almost 30 times. Never got answered, never got answered. The final time she called back, it was answered by Shirley Zalo, the boyfriend, Jason Zalo, his mother. Zalo claimed that her secretary's name was Nikki and that she had called her secretary and didn't know why Nikki's, the friend's number, was in her contacts. And she said, maybe Jason put it in my contacts. Now, today, Shirley Zalo denies that this ever happened, denies the conversation. So it's not known if Buziak's friend Nikki was telling the truth or if she was just trying to put herself in the middle of an investigation to feel important. People do that kind of thing. It's just not known. So every February, Lindsay Buziak's father, Jeff, leads a walk in her memory, I think in the neighborhood there, to keep the case alive for the public. He says he's been interviewed multiple times. I watched a little bit of him on Dr. Phil. I watched that for you so you wouldn't have to. You're welcome. And he said he has no confidence in the police. He says you can murder here apparently and there are no consequences. In August of 2017, on a message board, on his website, there was a comment that said, quote, "I killed Lindsay," and they misspelled her name, "and the stupid cops will never prove it." They never found who wrote that. In 2020, the Capital Daily, which is, I guess, a newspaper, requested the release of records from the police and unpublished information, and they received that. I don't know how much they got. I don't know if anything was redacted, but they got documents which revealed that the police were aware of 2 phones that were used by the suspects. The first one, of course, was the burner phone, bought in Vancouver, traveled on the ferry, used to contact Buziak. And it actually was used over 10 times. And it wasn't specific, but it was to talk to Buziak over 10 times. I can only imagine this woman was calling back and forth about potential houses. And, you know, it was business stuff. The second phone, though, was used to check the voicemail of the first phone. And this documentation that the media got also revealed unusual internet activity before her murder, and that's all it says. It won't go into details. The cops thought that maybe violent criminals on her Facebook friends list may have played a role, but it's so unsatisfying. There are no more details than that. So then I watched a thing put on by Canadian television, CTV News. And in and this is like an anniversary type thing, February of 2021, the Saanich Police and the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Mounties, they announced that there was new technology in DNA studies and other new technology, and I'm assuming it had to do with cell phones maybe, and that they had created new leads and they weren't talking about it. Xander Sherman, the investigative reporter for CTV News who did this big thing on the news, claims that the police know the names of the owners of both phones. And he concluded his reporting by saying that the police know far more about the case than they have revealed as of 2021. Now, she was murdered in 2008, so really long time. And that's the very disturbing, creepy, mysterious death of Lindsay Buziak. And as I said, there's a ton of information on the internet. Not all of it agrees in every single tiny detail, but most agree. And it's really very haunting, very disturbing, and very odd. It's almost like a movie or a book. So because of that, I am going to do a deep dive into this, as I always used to do on my channel. If you've seen my channel for any length of time, do not despair. The things you love the best are still available. They're just being a little more discreet. And I will do that on my own, see what we get. And we trust Deborah. She's under strict order. She's not allowed to watch anything that I do in the way of a deeper dive. She can watch these stories. I prefer she does, and I like her to go into her thing cold. But if you've watched any of the deeper dives that she's done on some of these cases I've covered in the past few weeks, I got to tell you, my mind was blown. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for sticking around. If you're new, you're very welcome, and I hope that you enjoy the distractions that I'm putting out here. And insights and deeper dives are on Ask Your Irish Granny on Substack. I have some plans for things to cover in the next little while. I'm working on them. The author of the Maryland book is coming. We're dealing in scheduling, but he will be here. I think that's all I have for today. So thank you very much, and I will be back. And slanga foil. Somebody was asking me, what is that weird thing you say? Slanga foil is Irish, and it means see you later. Thanks.